29th of October marks International Internet Day. It was on this day in 1969 that the first electronic message was transmitted from one computer to another. The use of the internet has revolutionized the way we communicate and created global corporate giants like Google, Facebook, Amazon and the like. Well, to tell us more about the impact of the internet and what the future holds for it, I'm joined by Athol Vesselink. He's at OpenWeb from our Durban studios. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, most people can't imagine life without the internet. Just tell us a little bit about its evolution from 1969 to now.
Well, Nampu, the interesting thing, firstly, thank you very much for having me on the show, and also, if you're at home, thanks very much for letting me into your space. Now, the interesting thing about the internet, if you consider that, as you said, in 1969, some 45 years ago, the internet first started, just a few months before that was the first moon landing. And if you consider that, I think the last trip to the moon was in 1976, and no one's gone back there since. So if you consider all the effort that man went through to go to the moon, for no real thing, and if you consider that the internet's been sort of evolving since then, it's quite amazing. And the thing that gets me about the internet is, for instance, at the moment you can have a surgeon who's on holiday with his parents in the Seychelles, with his family in the Seychelles, and a colleague of his may have a patient that's been operated on in a theatre, and this guy can interact with this guy in real time over the internet, and it's just made the world a very much smaller place.
It is quite incredible. Is there a quantum for the value that the internet has added to global GDP over the last number of years, do you think?
It's a tough question to answer. I don't know, but certainly from my sphere of the game that I play in terms of the internet is the engineering side. There's a guy called Gordon Moore he used to be the CEO for Intel in the 60s, and he came up with a sort of a law, and it's called Moore's law of semiconductors, and it says basically that every 2 years the chipsets that are in your computer or in your devices double in capacity. Now, if you look at that, it's just this kind of logarithmic increase in the power that these devices has. Now, that's just from a device perspective, but if you consider that those devices are useless unless they get connected, and little by little, I mean, you'll see it as you drive around the city or wherever you live, you'll see the guys on a daily basis digging up the road and putting up these different colored sort of orange and green and blue cables. Now, that's all fiber, and that's going into South Africa. And, South Africa, a lot of time, comes under criticism from everyone saying we're not moving fast enough. But it's a very big country, and to get it all rolled out takes a bit of time, but we are getting there.
Now, you're preempting me somewhat. We'll get to South Africa just now. But while the internet has served in the progress of humankind, some suggest that the fact that it now serves as a main medium of communication has actually served to regress us in terms of the way we communicate with people. If we look at the example of a husband and wife having a meal at the table, but communicating on their tablets, on their phones, with other people.
I understand that, and I mean that's something that you have to manage quite carefully. But if you consider that, from a human perspective, being connected is just the most amazing thing. And it's kind of an analogy where if I was to design an electronic brain, it would be like the internet. And maybe we should unpack what the internet really is. And so from an open web perspective, what we believe the internet is it's a kind of a digital representation of the human psyche as we know it. So if you look at it from that perspective, the internet is actually us, because not only is it growing all the time as we evolve and stuff, it's also indexable and searchable using search engines like Google and stuff. So, it's this amazing thing that we can ride if we choose to. And one of the fundamentals of the internet is it does give people the choice. And if you just look at the way let's look at democracy, for instance. The way democracy works is that you elect people into office. They essentially serve your interest as best they can. But very often there's a disconnect between getting information from you and implementing that. So if you look at things like, let's look at the e-tolling, for instance. Very controversial. The issue isn't e-tolling as such. It's the fact that the motorists that make use of those roads weren't asked about how best they would like to pay for it, because ultimately, let's face it, the roads had to be upgraded, someone's got to pay for it. So if you use the kind of internet democracy, what you could do is basically give guys the opportunity to view a presentation on the internet as such. They can then do a Q&A, much like we're doing at the moment, and then afterwards you get an opportunity to vote for it. Now, all that technology exists at the moment, and at the end of the day, people then have the ability to be asked and answered over how they want things to move. And that's all available now. It's not some newfangled sort of crystal ball thing that I've got here. This is the actual reality of where we are.
Athol, with stiff competition in South Africa among ICT companies, do you envisage that access to hardware like smartphones as well as access to the internet is going to get cheaper and obviously then more accessible?
Absolutely. You know, it has to, and it's kind of supply and demand. I mean, last year I was in the Seychelles. Now, it's a little small country. I think the population is minute. And the thing that interests me about that is almost the entire population had smartphones. And that could be, you know, I mean, it's a controlled environment. It's on an island. But that's a microcosm for what we have to wait. And I mean, you know, whether or not it's a smart TV that's got a browser on it, that's internet enabled, or if it's your phone, or perhaps a traditional PC or a tablet or something to that effect. I mean, all these devices have the capacity to connect. I mean, I was reading something yesterday about, you know, the new Volvo car. That's internet enabled. So all the time, supply's driving the demand, and these devices will get cheaper and cheaper, and so will the connectivity. You know, it's got to start somewhere. It's early days. And if you also consider that we're at the bottom end of Africa, we have to, you know, the content that we're hungry for, when all Google servers and stuff sit in the US, we have to travel all the way from where we are on undersea cables to get there, and it's expensive. It does cost somewhere, but the more people get on, the more supplies, you know, the more the prices will be driven down.
Athol, thank you so much for your passionate insights on the internet. That was Athol Wesselink. He's at Open Web from our Durban studio.